Hi, everybody. Thanks for doing this. I thought it would be useful, we're going to talk about recycling, but that's a pretty broad umbrella. So I thought it would be nice to start off to have each of you kind of explain what your role in that space is and tell us a little bit more about your company and what you do there so people will have some context for our discussion. Do you want to start, Kunal?
Yeah, thanks, Gabby. So Kunal Sinha, I head up the recycling business for Glencore. I'm pretty sure people are aware of what Glencore does. In terms of recycling, we have been recycling critical metals literally since World War II at some of our assets. So we've been along in the space for a long time. We've recycled millions of tons of discarded products, and we've produced millions of tons of copper and several 100,000 tons and ounces of precious metals from recycled sources. So it's a fairly global business for us. It's been around for many decades. What we recycle are things like end-of-life electronics, lithium-ion batteries, EAF dust for zinc. We do some vanadium from recycling and essentially produce things like nickel, copper, cobalt, precious metals, and soon lithium from recycled sources. So that's just a very high-level overview of what we do in recycling.
Okay. Julian?
Great. So Julian Treger from CoTec. So we have a suite of disruptive technologies that can answer some of the historic problems for mining, like how you deal with very hard rock material, how you deal with waste that's very fine, how you deal with low-grade material, a lot of which has been left in the dumps around the US and North America. And we're focusing on copper waste, on iron ore waste, manganese waste, and we also have a technology which can recycle the used magnets that circulate in this economy and therefore increase US independence from China on the magnet front. And we are executing that now using the technologies to find waste opportunities. We have one project we're developing in Texas for the magnets, and we have another big iron ore dump retreating opportunity in Minnesota.
And just to clarify, when you talk about magnets, you mean like rare earth magnets? What do we need those for?
Well, the magnets which contain rare earths are used for robotics and obviously electric vehicles, engines, telephones, but they're also very important for AI. A great source of the magnets will be the hard disk drives, which are being used in the AI centers, and we need to be independent in the US in terms of having our own source of magnets. Otherwise, there is a vulnerability as AI is weaponized that growth can be stopped if we have to import those materials.
Got it. David?
All right, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Cirba Solutions. So we've been recycling batteries for over about 30 years. We have 6 operating facilities in North America and about 350 employees. We announced a 7th site in South Carolina that's on the books to be built as well. We recycle everything, every size, shape, and type of battery. So alkaline batteries in your remote control at home, or obviously lithium-ion, nickel, lead-based batteries. So we bring all those batteries into our facilities and process them with the end game of recovering those critical minerals. So making sure that we get the zinc, the manganese out of alkaline, for example, or obviously the nickel, cobalt, lithium out of lithium-ion batteries. And really, we look at this industry as there's been a lot of batteries that have been produced over the last 15 years in the United States. A lot of batteries that are continuing to be produced. Over 400 gigawatt hours of capacity is already being built right now. That's going to grow to 1,200 by 2030. And we have the opportunity to recover the scrap material from those batteries as well as end-of-life batteries and make sure that those critical minerals stay in the United States and can be reused over and over again to produce new batteries. So the largest operating mine in the world is either in our pockets in our desk drawers at home, or driving around on the roads right now, or actually powering some of the grid. So those batteries have been built and are available for us to recover and capture those critical metals and reuse them over and over again.
Okay. Well, I'm a reporter, and I actually focus on the auto industry, and we all know today is Liberation Day, tariff news coming this afternoon. So I did want to take a moment to ask each of you, what do you think the impact of tariffs will be on your business? I know we don't have all of the details yet, but just from what you've seen so far, I think it would be remiss not to at least address this. I've heard some people who are kind of part of the EV supply chain who are actually excited about tariffs. They think it'll give them a leg up versus having to compete with China on some materials, on price and things like that. So how do you guys, each of you, feel about that?
Well, I think, look, we'll find out later today, but there's two parts to our business. We have a huge sort of industrial assets business, but we have an equally important and large marketing or trading business. I think tariffs can create uncertainty and volatility in the markets. I'm pretty sure the trading business would actually make some money off of it. From an industrial asset side, of course, it challenges certain assets depending on where you are and how the tariffs affect you. So we've been looking at how would that affect which asset and how do you sort of weather the impacts of the tariffs and then deal with it. So there's a lot of work going on both sides of the business. Yeah.
Okay.
Leaving aside discussions about inflation, I think that it will be good for our business because it's going to push up the price of commodities within the US. We've already seen an enormous divide develop between the copper price in the US and the copper price globally in London. And similarly, we've seen some dislocations already occurring in other commodities. So I think it will have the effect of making what's in the US more valuable with higher margins. And so it will encourage mining in the US, but also it will encourage recycling in the US because the big mine that we're all carrying in our pockets is going to be more valuable in terms of its dollar price. So I think it will be effective in that way in terms of encouraging more development of a domestic industry.
Yeah, just to add on that, I think it's, everybody thinks that, from an economic perspective, right, there could be jobs, there's economic activity, more investment. A lot of companies that are in the battery space want to invest in the United States. They see the market opportunity, whether it's EVs, if you still look at the EV penetration rate growing, or it's grid storage, data centers. There's a lot of need for batteries. We still import over 60% of the batteries that are used in the United States for stuff. So we don't have a self-sufficient battery supply chain or even battery production, let alone the materials that go into batteries, whether it's lithium or nickel or cobalt, whatever that may be. So I think, the tariffs are going to hopefully attract that investment. And there's still obviously some financial incentives that probably need to be put on top of that for companies that know how to make cathodes and anodes and electrolytes, things like that for batteries to be able to come in the United States. But in my mind, I think it's a positive because it attracts that investment in the United States, creates jobs, but it also helps us look at from a domestication, like we can close the loop now on how we produce batteries and use those batteries and then recover those metals again and reuse them over and over.
Okay, so higher prices will be good for business for recycling and attract investment. So those are good things. Are there any negatives you see coming from this?
I'll jump in, and then you guys can. So I think some of the negative stuff is we all have to build plants, right? We all have to build assets. So you look at steel and different things like that have to be imported to build these assets, steel, vessels, pipes, pumps, all those kind of things. And to labor to some extent, mentioned inflation. We still have to build plants that actually make money, right? And at the end of the day, none of us work for nonprofits, right? So the reinvestment economics have to make sense for companies like all of ours to be able to put that money in the ground. Having tariffs on a lot of different materials that may be required to build these assets, that could have a potential negative impact and something we have to overcome.
Okay.
Yeah, we have to see the details, but a lot of the supply chain goes in and out of the US, particularly with Canada, and that's very complicated. So there could be lots of perverse negative consequences. But in terms of mining inside the US or recycling inside the US, the higher prices should help.
Okay. I also wanted to ask you, we've seen a lot of executive orders from this administration. There was one on critical minerals recently. There was one on, I think, right on January 20th, talked about energy dominance. The sentiment you get from it is, drill, baby, drill is back. does recycling fit into that kind of policy vision or agenda? How do you think, how do you fit into that? How can this fit into that energy dominance goal?
Well, maybe, I think, actually I was at Sarah Week and I heard Secretary Wright talk about that phrase, and he sort of had a wider interpretation of the phrase, which I thought was a very articulate way of talking about this topic. So in my view, I think a part of energy dominance or energy security is now linked to these critical minerals or metals. Copper is a classic one, right? So if you talk about the energy needed for the grid or for AI or for any of these things, just as a one example, like I heard one of the AI firms, they couldn't ramp up the hyperscalers to the level they wanted to. It was not because of money. They couldn't find enough transformers. And 60% of the weight of a transformer is copper, right? So I think while it may not directly feature, it's pretty obvious, because if you think about it, for any country, especially a developed Western region, recycling is a pretty ready source of domestically produced critical minerals. The other way to think about it is if you think about mining, which is equally important and needs to be, both have to be kind of ramped up in parallel, but mining projects, there is a particular size below which it's not worth spending all that time on permitting and the mine plans and what. You won't go and spend $1 billion to build a 2,000-ton mine, right? So there is a size aspect to mining, and then there's also a lot of the good deposits are in difficult jurisdictions. So the question is, why is capital not flowing into that? Is because, well, you need to account for jurisdictional risk, and maybe the capital markets are not there yet. So I would argue, if you think about recycling, a lot of those risks are not there, because recycling projects, for whether they produce copper or nickel, cobalt or lithium, they can be as small or as big as you want, because they're fairly modular, and you don't have jurisdictional risk, because it's all, whether you are doing it in the US or Canada or Europe, it's your jurisdiction. So every which way you look at it, and back to your question, if energy dominance is linked to having enough critical metals, which I think it is, then recycling is yet another lower risk source of critical metals. So I think it fits in the strategy.
I mean, I think the other point to make is the speed. I mean, when we talk about recycling at a broad church, there's the recycling of e-waste, which you do very quickly.
Right.
But if we talk about recycling of metallic content in the ground, as we heard yesterday, it can take 25 years to build a new mine. If you do recycling of tailings, you're talking about 2, 3, 4 years. It's a vast difference. So in terms of the rapidity at which you can actually produce the materials to achieve the independence that you need, I think recycling needs to be significantly elevated as something which can be done. You're not doing the primary mining. It's low risk. It's flexible. As you said, you can do the sort of high-grade mining that traditional mining frowns upon with waste dumps, and that's perfectly acceptable. But the importance is it will produce results, and it can even produce results within this 4-year administration, whereas doing anything in the Ukraine or Greenland is still going to be, at least a decade, if not 2.
Let me just I'll try to wrap a bow. I agree with both of what Julian and Kunal said, especially what Kunal was talking about, just the mining piece. I think when if you look at it, we know, and we have to mine, right? There's no way of getting all the minerals that we need if we don't mine stuff out of the earth. That's just a fact. So we're gonna have to do those things, but we know it takes time, and we know not every resource is a financially viable project, right? So when you think about recycling, the minerals have already been mined. They're just up above the ground, walking around or driving around here, or sitting in a grid storage area. So like that mining has already been done. So we've already kind of drilled already for those things. So recycling is a natural. I know there's, again, scale and quantity is something that's going to have to progress over time. But like it's something that's there today that we can access, and we don't have to have massive permits and different things like that. Regulation that has to change. We can actually, we've been recycling batteries for a long time. We can do that today.
Okay, so that's a great pitch for recycling versus mining. It's faster, it's more sustainable, all of these things.
And, not versus, it's mining and recycling.
Mining and recycling,
Yeah.
okay. I think a lot of the things we talk about at this conference, it's like these are all great ideas. So what needs to happen for this to for execution, for this to really happen in practice? So I want to ask, what are the biggest challenges to doing what you're talking about for each one of you in your business right now? What's standing in your way? What's frustrating? What's holding you back from just, or maybe you are, going full steam, but what's the biggest challenge you're dealing with to try to make this a reality, all those things you're talking about?
Okay, I can start. There's many challenges, you can go on and on, but I think the two key ones. One is, if you think about, a lot of people think if you're good at mining, you should be really good at recycling. That's actually not true. I think we are good at recycling, but not because we are a big mining company, it's because we are a commodity trader. So recycling, in my view, is like commodity trading, because you don't sit on a mine. Every day a new truck comes in, you have no idea what's in that truck. It's batteries or e-waste, but you don't know how much copper is in it or nickel is in it. So you're managing inbound risk, you're managing outbound, you're a conversion business. So you are heavily reliant on what gets collected upstream and comes through your funnel. The collection side of these things really needs some better, I would say, regulatory policy making. If you look at Europe, I think they are much more advanced in encouraging recycling and collections through what was the V directive and now the battery directive and things like those. So I think that's one area where regulations do work. We don't have enough in the US or North America. So that's one piece, because that's hard for private sector to do too much in. It does require policy, education, awareness, communities, and all of that work where I think government plays a role. So that's one area. The other, I think, is I think we heard Senator Murkowski address it earlier, which is, again, permitting reform. So what we are trying to build, for example, we're an investor in Li-Cycle. They're building this refinery in Rochester. Cirba is building their similar assets. Other people are doing the same. Recycling or mining, in the end, you need to build these midstream refining assets. You can find capital, you can find everything else. Permitting reform is key. The ability to know that I have a predictable timeline to build things that are not just a mechanical processing plant, it's an actual chemical refining, is key. So, and I'm not talking about our projects, I'm saying generally for this industry to grow further exponentially, that would be the second part that is very important.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
From a mining rather than like an e-waste perspective, there are a couple of things which would be helpful. First of all, more information about where the sites are, because I'm not sure everybody even knows where the sites are. I know in Canada alone there are 10,000 closed mine sites. I don't know how many there are in the US. And then it would be great if the existing mining companies were somewhat compelled to make use of their dumps, because they generally put that off till a later day and really don't get around to it. Then, if you're restarting something that's already been mined on a brownfield site, the administration really needs to come up with an accelerated, super accelerated, almost immediate permitting regime, because if you're going to go back into that permitting cycle, the advantage of the recycling, which is that it's there and has already been mined, is lost. And then there also needs to be further thought about liability management, how the rehabilitation liabilities, the bonding aspects of retreating a site are allocated between potentially the government and the existing operators. So there's a few issues which need to be thought about, but it's a huge opportunity.
Yeah. I think the only thing I would add is there's things like content requirements and incentives to do that, right? Using recycled content in new batteries, for example. There's some language actually in the IRA there that talks about that. But I think that's something that would be helpful, obviously, for the industry to have a signal that there's going to be a demand for those products and potentially some incentive and pricing incentive for that to happen. I think a lot of companies are talking about trying to use a lot of recycled content because of the carbon footprint and how that reduces their overall environmental footprint as a company. I think the other thing is again preventing waste from leaving the United States, right? We got all these batteries here. Let's put some restrictions to where none of this material can leave. Again, there's a lot of critical minerals that escape to other countries today, particularly into China, because they're able to ship waste material with critical minerals in it back into their country because they want that. So restrictions like that, I think, can also help. There's been a lot of discussion around pricing floors, which I think would help the industry out a little bit. I know it's really challenging to implement something like that and have a system that whether the government can manage or whatever. But if you have some pricing floors for things like lithium and nickel and cobalt, some of these projects will make a lot more economical sense for that investment to occur in North America and the United States.
You say pricing floor, you mean, can you just explain that a little more? Like
just a protection, like the price, there's some sort of guarantee or an incentive that the price cannot drop below this level to protect the companies from making the investment. I mean, these are billion-dollar-plus assets that are being put in the ground, and if pricing drops below their cost level, which it has in many cases over the last few years, the plants are not economical anymore, right? And you have people shuttering assets and things like that. That's a pretty big financial hardship. So creating a floor that gives you at least some reinvestment economics to keep those plants operational would give some protection to companies to do that.
Okay, so yeah, I remember being here last year, and everybody was talking about China was flooding the commodity markets, and prices were going down, and projects weren't viable. So you're saying would be one way to kind of prevent that.
Yeah.
And then the ban on exports. That I've researched a little bit about that. I think that's one where, I think one thing I've learned from just like researching this preparing for this panel is that this business is all about feedstock. It's all about if you're the recycler, it's all about getting to scale. And Kunal, what you said about this is a conversion business, that's been a very enlightening point for me. It's a lot more like commodity trading than people might have thought of at first. Right. And so looking for some sort of protections or guarantees to make the business viable. I think, I'm going to put on my kind of auto battery reporter hat for a second. I think now the recycling business seems like it's in a little bit of a more challenging time just because, I think 4 years ago or however long, there were very high forecasts and expectations of EV production that have come down, right? There's the pricing stuff that you've talked about. There's a lot of players. Some of them are venture-backed companies that are in that phase of their existence where they're not necessarily profitable in the short term, but they're all fighting, to get that feedstock and that test the kind of profitability or sustainability of some of the other players in the space. So I guess my question from all that would be, where do you see the recycling industry going in the short term now versus the long term? What are how do we get through this moment now in the short term versus this needs to survive because it's going to be an important part of the puzzle in the long term for energy dominance or energy independence?
I think, look, we are I have a slightly different view in the sense our business is more diversified. We recycle a lot of different forms of what people will call waste, I would say, post-consumer resources, right? So, and so we always look at what's the next wave of what will be recycled, and you want to catch it ahead. Like we used to recycle transformers when electrical frequency changed in Ontario. We moved on to e-waste in the 80s. We are now getting into solar panels. We're getting into the auto waste that used to go to landfill and the copper was lost. Lithium batteries we got into early 2000s and now into lithium. So we're always looking at, from a feed perspective, how do you diversify? I guess if your question is specific to the batteries, I would say there's a few ways to look at it. I think we still believe the long-term thematic need for recycling as a source of these metals is pretty positive and pretty strong. But that's long-term. The short-term sentiment, obviously, is a bit challenging given everything else that everyone's aware of. So it's really about how we look at our business is you need to build a business that can sustain the cyclical nature of of commodity markets and, frankly, recycling markets. And for that, it's two things. You need to learn to manage your risks better. It's very easy to make money in recycling. It's easier to lose all that money. So we need to manage the risks better, which we have learned over the years. And second, you need to be able to scale things up and run at scale, because that's when you can keep your costs low. So if you do those two simple things, you'll be able to sustain through the short term, and then you should still be fine in the long term.
I want to hear what you have to say, but looks like we're out of time. So if you have something to say, go ahead and say it, I guess. I don't see anybody ushering me off stage.
I mean, I think he hit it head on. I mean, it's the investment. It's just they got to continue to invest. I think there's going to be a little bit of short-term pain because a lot of people have rushed to get into this. We see this with a lot of commodity metals, right? Everybody rushes when they see prices go up, so a lot of people rush to get in this. It's a capital-intensive business, and it takes a lot of capital to be able to survive. So I think that's the biggest thing, is to have great customer relationships, do a really good job of what you do, be safe, and at the end of the day, have the capital fortitude to make it through.
Okay. All right. I think we need to wrap, so thank you so much. That was an enlightening discussion.
Thanks, Gabrielle.
Thank you.